I just wanted one night of freedom with another guy, but my husband got mad over it and did this. Hey, it feels strange to be sharing my story here, but I guess everyone needs an outlet. My name is Morgan, and up until recently, I thought I had it all figured out. I was happily married to William for 3 years and we were living the dream we had built since high school. If someone had told me a few months ago that this would be my life now, I'd have honestly thought that person was lying or joking. But now my nightmare has become my reality. William and I met in our junior year of high school. It was a time when everything seemed possible and love felt like the answer to every question. He was the shy, smart guy in class, and I was the outgoing social butterfly. We clicked, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. I still remember our first date like it was yesterday. It was a warm spring afternoon, and William had mustered up the courage to ask me out. He was so nervous, stumbling over his words as he invited me to a local diner for milkshakes. I said yes, without hesitation. My heart was racing with excitement for our first date. We sat in a cozy corner booth, sipping milkshakes and chatting for hours. William was a great listener and made me laugh like no one else could. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing our hopes, dreams, and fears. As the sun began to set, we reluctantly left the diner, neither of us wanting the night to end. We walked hand in hand through the park, the world around us fading into the background as we lost ourselves in each other's company. I knew I'd found someone special when I saw the starry sky. William and I were keen to spend more time together. We'd quickly become close friends and confidants. Our second date was just as memorable as the first. A few days after our first date, William surprised me by turning up at my doorstep with a picnic basket. He'd planned a romantic picnic in the park with sandwiches, fruit, and my favorite chocolate chip cookies. It was such a thoughtful gesture, and I couldn't help but smile as we walked to the park hand in hand. We found a nice, secluded spot under a big oak tree and spread out a blanket. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining brightly overhead and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. We chatted and laughed, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams for the future, and everything in between. As we sat there enjoying each other's company, I felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over me. It was at that moment that I knew William was someone special, someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. After we finished our picnic, we took a stroll. As we explored the park, we came across a pond with a small dock. William suggested we sit and watch the sunset, which was a perfect end to a perfect day. As we sat there, the sky turned shades of orange and pink. I felt grateful to have William by my side. Our second date solidified our bond, and from that day on, we were inseparable. By our third date, I was really starting to fall for William. We had been friends for a while, and I always felt a spark between us, but I never imagined as we sat in the cozy little cafe, William looked at me with those kind eyes of his and asked me to be his girlfriend. I was taken aback, but in the best way possible. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and I knew that I wanted to be with him too. I said yes, of course, and we spent the rest of the day walking around the city hand in hand, feeling like we were on top of the world. From that moment on, everything felt different. I felt different. It was like all the pieces of my life were finally, on our fourth date, William and I decided to try something new and exciting. We both love the outdoors, so we went on a hike in a nearby national park. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining and a gentle breeze blowing through the trees as we walked. We chatted about everything under the sun, from our favorite childhood memories to our hopes and dreams for the future. At one point, we stumbled upon a beautiful clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. We sat on a big rock and William pulled out a simple picnic. He'd prepared a simple picnic, sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine. We laughed and talked for hours, enjoying each other's company in the peacefulness of our surroundings. As the sun started to set, we reluctantly headed back to the car, feeling happy and content. It was a day I'll always remember. It made me realize how much I cared for William and how special our connection was. William was so easy to be with, he was caring, attentive, and always made me laugh. We shared so many interests and had the same values and goals in life. I felt like I could truly be myself around him and he accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. As our relationship grew, so did my love for him. I never knew I could care for someone so deeply. Every moment with him was special, whether we were out on a fancy date or just cuddled up on the couch watching movies. He made me feel loved and cherished in a way I had never experienced before. When William proposed to me, I was over the moon. It was the happiest day of my life. I couldn't wait to spend forever with him, building a life and a family together. I knew that with him by my side, I could take on anything that life threw at us. We continued to make memories together, exploring new places, trying new things and falling more in love with each passing day. We supported each other through the ups and downs of high school, celebrating each other's successes and comforting each other in times of need. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. Our story took a turn that neither of us could have predicted, and now I find myself here, reminiscing about the days when life was simpler and love was new. Looking back, I can't help but smile at how far we've come from that first date to now. Our love has only grown stronger. William is my rock, my best friend and my soulmate. I'm so grateful to have him in my life and I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. Our love story continued through college. We both attended the same university, studying hard during the week and enjoying each other's company on the weekends. We had big plans for the future, like getting married and starting a family. We were so perfect, so certain. After college, we both landed jobs in our respective fields. William found success as a programmer, his skills in high demand in the tech industry. I found a job at a local company, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. We moved into a cozy little apartment, filled it with our dreams and aspirations, and settled into our new life together. Life was good, we were happy. Looking back now, I realized that maybe I was too caught up in my own world to see the cracks forming in our relationship. We still went on dates. Evenings still said I love you every day, but something had changed. Maybe it was the monotony of everyday life, the routine that had crept into our marriage. Maybe it was my own insecurities, my fear of missing out on something more exciting, more passionate, as the years passed. Our lives settled into a comfortable routine. We both had demanding jobs and most of our days were spent working hard and trying to make ends meet. Our evenings were spent together watching TV or just talking about our day. I loved William dearly, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I felt like something was missing. I started craving excitement and adventure. Our life together had become predictable, and I longed for something more. I wanted to feel alive again and experience the thrill of the unknown. I tried to shake off these feelings, telling myself that I was being selfish. After all, I had a loving husband, a stable job, and a comfortable life. But the longing persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. I started to withdraw from William and lose interest in our usual activities. I would often find myself lost and I started thinking about a different way of living. I knew I had to do something to shake things up, but I wasn't sure what. As time went on, my thoughts turned to fantasies of cheating on William. I knew it was wrong, but the idea of something spontaneous and exciting was too tempting to resist. I even considered suggesting an open relationship, but I knew William wouldn't agree. I wanted to try something new and exciting to break up the monotony of our day-to-day. To be honest, I was really quite tempted. During the day, the idea of being with someone else, even just for a moment, filled me with a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't help myself. The thrill of the unknown called to me, promising excitement and passion. I tried to push these thoughts aside I tried to focus on my marriage and the life I'd built with William, but I couldn't shake this feeling that there was something more out there. My marriage was going through a rough patch, and there were times when I felt tempted to cheat. I was seeking validation or excitement outside of my marriage. I even went as far as installing a dating app and going on a few dates, but I never crossed the line into physical intimacy. I was held back by fear of getting caught, fear of hurting William, fear of losing everything we had built together. I remember the anxiety that consumed me, the constant worry. I was worried that someone would recognize me or that my actions would somehow find their way back to William. It was a dark period where I felt lost and unsure of myself. I sought solace in the anonymity of new clubs where I could pretend to be single and flirt with strangers, but when things started to escalate, I always pulled back. I was paralyzed by fear and realized that these actions were a symptom of a deeper issue within myself. I was seeking something outside of our relationship to fill a void. Now I know deep down that nothing can replace what I had with William. As time went on, I found myself growing further. Despite William's efforts to spice things up and inject some excitement into our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling of boredom that had settled over me like a heavy fog. William tried his best. He really did. He planned spontaneous date nights, surprised me with thoughtful gifts, and even suggested we try new things in the bedroom. But no matter what he did, I still felt like something was missing. I knew he was trying to overcompensate to make up for the fact that I was feeling restless and unsatisfied, but no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives together had become dull and predictable. I felt guilty for feeling that way, but William was a wonderful husband, kind, loving, and always there for me. Despite his efforts, I couldn't help but feel like there was something missing in our relationship. As the weeks turned into months, my feelings of boredom and restlessness only grew stronger. I knew deep down that I should have talked to William about how I was feeling. Maybe I should have suggested we try therapy or something to spice things up, but I didn't. Instead, I let my feelings fester, allowing them to slowly poison our relationship. I became increasingly distant and lost in my own thoughts and fantasies of what life could be like if things were different. I knew I was being unfair to William. He didn't deserve to be treated this way. He was a good man and a loving husband, and he deserved better than what I was giving him. I couldn't stop myself. I was caught in a cycle of wanting something more, something exciting and new, while feeling guilty for wanting it. It was a vicious cycle that I didn't know how to break. Then, one day, an opportunity presented itself that would change everything. My best friends at work invited me out for a night on the town, and I decided to go, hoping it would help lift my spirits. I had no idea that decision would lead me down a path I never could have imagined. I've always been a social person, but I hadn't been particularly close to my coworkers. I worked with Emily and Jessica, who started working at the same company. We'd been friends since college, and they made work more exciting. I used to see work as just another boring part of my routine, but now I enjoyed it more. As the weekend approached, Emily and Jessica suggested a girls' night out with our other close friends from college and high school. I was really keen to go. I hadn't gone out with my friends in a while, and the prospect of a fun night out lifted my spirits. I shared the plan with William, who understood my need for some time away and encouraged me to go and have a good time. When the weekend approached, I was thrilled at the prospect of a night out with my friends. It had been ages since we had done something together, so I put more effort into my outfit than usual. To make the evening special, we started with street food, enjoying each other's company and chatting about our high school days and where everyone had ended up since then. Then we moved on to a local pub, where we had drinks and a good laugh as the night went on. I noticed a man across the room who caught my eye. He was good-looking, and there was something about him that I found intriguing. We exchanged smiles, and I felt a rush of excitement. They encouraged me to approach him, even though I was initially hesitant. They said it was just a girls' night out and that I deserved to have some fun. They also said there were no rules on a girls' night out. I felt strengthened by their support, so I walked over to him. We started chatting and he introduced himself as Vincent. He was charming and easy to talk to, and we were laughing and enjoying each other's company before we knew it. Vincent joined our group and we continued to have a great time together as the evening wore on and the drinks flowed. We all started getting bolder and bolder. I found myself drawn to Vincent and we started making out. In that moment, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in a long time. The idea of doing something spontaneous and exciting appealed to me, and I let myself get swept up in the moment. Vincent suggested we go back to his apartment. I didn't hesitate to agree. My friend was really supportive and even said they'd help cover me if needed. Looking back, I know that was a lie. I made some mistakes that night because I was drinking. I let my guard down and ended up cheating on my husband. We had sex and I let myself get carried away. I allowed myself to forget everything else. We even watched a movie together. In that moment, it felt like I was single again, with no responsibilities or worries. I was so caught up in the moment that I forgot to send a text to my husband, letting him know I wouldn't be coming home. I was staying with a friend. It was a selfish act, driven by the desire for excitement and spontaneity. But I would come to regret it deeply the next morning. When I got back to Vincent's apartment, I realized I'd done something wrong. I'd cheated on my husband. I felt guilty, disgusted, and despairing. I gathered my things and left, feeling ashamed and broken. I was anxious about going home. How could I face my husband after what I'd done? When I arrived home, my husband was surprised I hadn't called or texted him as I'd promised. I lied, telling him I'd stayed with a friend because I was too drunk to drive. He seemed to believe me, but I felt trapped. I was unsure whether to tell him the truth or keep quiet and hope it would go away. I chose to bury the truth, hoping to move on. I told him I'd stayed with a friend because I was too drunk to drive. He seemed to believe me and asked about my night. I lied again, saying it was great and that I'd missed him and our friends. I felt guilty for lying to him, but I was too confused and scared to tell him the truth. I felt trapped, unsure whether to confess and risk losing him or keep quiet and hope it would all go away. I chose to bury the truth, hoping to move on. I tried to carry on with life as usual, but I was still feeling guilty, especially when my husband was so loving and kind to me. When I went back to work, I noticed my friends acting a bit strange, but I put it down to the embarrassing antics of the night before, with everything on my mind. I didn't dwell on it too much, but as I reflected on my friends' behavior, I began to see red flags. What kind of friends would encourage me to? I started to question their loyalty and the influence they had on me. The guilt and shame of my actions began to consume me. I realized that I was living a lie and it was very hard. I felt like I was caught between a rock and a hard place. I didn't want to lie to my husband, but I also didn't want to lose him. I tried to carry on with the guilt, hoping it would eventually fade away. I started being extremely kind to him, trying to overcompensate. However, the more I tried to make things right, the more distant he became. No matter how much I tried to be close to him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping away. I no longer felt that thirst and hunger for spontaneity like I did before. It was as if my life had returned to normal and the excitement I once craved had dissipated. My friends, who had been so close to me before, seemed distant, as if they were keeping something from me. Even my husband, who I really tried to get close to, was distant. No matter how much I tried to mix things up and bring some excitement back into my life, he only grew more and more distant. I found myself longing for the days when everything was new and exciting. I missed the thrill of trying something new and stepping out of my comfort zone, but now everything felt stale and repetitive. I tried to talk to my friends about it to recapture some of that old magic, but they didn't seem interested. It was as if they had moved on, leaving me behind. My relationship with my husband suffered the most. We used to be so close, but now there was a distance between us that I couldn't bridge. I tried to be more affectionate and more attentive, but it seemed like nothing I did could bring us back together. He was always busy with work or with his own thoughts, and I felt like I was losing him. I started to question everything. Had I made a mistake? Was I destined to live a life of mediocrity, always longing for something more but never quite reaching it? I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. My life had become a cycle of work, home, sleep, repeat. I felt trapped in it. I missed my husband. I missed our close bond, but I couldn't figure out what was bothering him. I tried to bury the guilt and pretend like it never happened, but the truth has a way of coming out. One night it did. A few weeks ago, my husband surprised me by making a reservation at a restaurant. He said he felt that things had been a little rigid between us lately and that he thought going out would help us reconnect. I was excited because it had been a while since we had done something like that together. I had work that day, so I told him I would come back from work and then we could go out for dinner. When I got to work that day, I should have noticed some red flags, but I was too caught up in my routine to pay attention. My friends, who had been distant with me, approached me and started chatting during lunchtime. We talked for a while, and they asked me about my husband. I told them he was fine, and they seemed surprised. They asked me if we were still together, and I asked them. They said they were just asking, and they didn't say anything else. I thought it was a bit strange, but I didn't think much of it. Work finished up as usual, so I clocked off and went home. We got ready for dinner and then we went out. When we got to the restaurant, we ordered our food, and it was a little awkward between us at first, but we soon started chatting and got into it. We chatted more freely and talked about how busy we'd been recently and how we'd been a bit distant with each other. We covered a lot of ground, and then at one point my husband asked me if I had anything to tell him. Looking back, I realized that was his way of giving me a chance to come clean, but at that moment I didn't have the courage. I hesitated and then told him no, I didn't. I didn't have anything to tell him, and he seemed okay with that. He was a little surprised and hurt, perhaps, but we continued on with our dinner. We paid the bill, left a generous tip, and then started heading home. However, when we got into the car to drive back home, my husband reached into a compartment in the car and brought out some papers. He handed them to me, and when I looked at them, I realized they were divorce papers. My heart sank and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. I was horrified and my hands started trembling as I stared at the divorce papers in disbelief. Why was this happening? The only explanation that came to mind was that I'd cheated, but how had he found out? As I looked at my husband, his once cheerful expression was now replaced by a mix of hurt and betrayal. I knew he'd found out about my secret. He'd discovered my infidelity and he was crushed. He said he couldn't understand how I could betray him like that. How I could throw away everything we'd built together. He explained that he had a video and my heart sank as he played it on his phone. There, clear as day, was footage of me kissing the stranger from the bar. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was devastated. My friends had betrayed me. They seemed so supportive and curious about my night out, but they had recorded my indiscretion and sent it to my husband. I then understood why they approached me during lunch. I couldn't comprehend their betrayal. Why would they do this to me? When had they even recorded me? I wasn't so drunk that night as to not be able to pay attention to my surroundings. I was really confused about how my friends had managed to record me without me noticing. Had I been so distracted that night that I didn't realize what was going on? My husband said that he'd sent it to me that night, and he'd given me a chance to confess. He said he'd waited and waited, but I just kept quiet. He said he'd decided to end our marriage. I felt numb. I was in shock. I was hit by a wave of realization. I had destroyed my marriage and hurt the person I loved most in the world, all for a brief moment of excitement. My husband said he was angry and betrayed, but he was not cruel. He told me I had 10 minutes to get my things out of his house. He had already sent a message to my brother to come. He said he'd already sent the video to my parents and siblings and explained everything. He also said my brother would most likely have already been waiting for us at the house or would arrive in a matter of minutes by the time we reached it. It was as if it was all a joke and everything was glossing over me. I didn't even know. I was at a loss as to how to react. I cried and begged, but my husband wouldn't even listen. He just told me to be quiet and let him drive when we got to the house. He said my 10 minutes started now, and my brother hadn't arrived yet. He said he would send a text to my brother to confirm where he was and that I could arrange my stuff and put it out on the porch in the meantime. He was quite insistent. I knew there was no point in talking to him now or trying to convince him not to kick me out. I'd already checked my phone and seen the messages from my parents and even my siblings. They were all horrified and disappointed. My parents told me to not even dare contact my husband and to just pack my stuff and come home. I went back to the house and they said they'd help me talk to my husband, which made me feel a bit better. I packed and put my stuff on the porch, and in no time my brother was there. My husband didn't even come out, he just shut the door in my face. I had to go back to my parents' house. Staying with my parents was tough. They tried their best to. My siblings were supportive too, even though they were angry at what I'd done. They encouraged me to give my husband time to calm down, suggesting he might take me back since I'd never cheated on him before. I started commuting from my parents' house to work because my husband hadn't let me take the car when I left his house. He'd bought the car, so I understood his decision. On top of that, he'd cleared out our joint account, leaving me with practically nothing while the money was his. This sudden lack of financial independence hit me hard, showing me how much I depended on him. Unfortunately, bad news spreads faster than good news, and soon everyone at work knew that my husband had kicked me out of the house. It was during this time that I saw the true nature of my so-called. I called up some friends to see what they thought. They were pretty heartless, making indirect comments that made my situation seem even worse. About a week after moving back in with my parents, I decided to resign from my job before leaving. I reported the situation to the Human Resources office, but I didn't have high hopes that they could do anything. The whole thing had happened outside of work hours, and the comments my friends made were indirect. I felt like I had to speak up before resigning. Surprisingly, my boss was understanding. Instead of the usual 2 weeks' notice, he let me leave immediately. It was a nice gesture, and it helped a bit during this tough time. Now I'm back at my parents' house without a job. I feel pretty sad and uncertain. I even worry that I'll sink into depression. My husband made sure I didn't forget the divorce papers, but I refused to sign them. My parents advised me to wait. I decided to wait and see if my husband might change his mind, despite his silence. I was hopeful that we could work things out and start over. I began searching for remote job opportunities. The idea of working from home appealed to me, as I was tired of socializing after the whole betrayal. I was told by friends that perhaps none of this would have happened if I hadn't gone out with them that night. My mother-in-law, my lawyer, got in touch with me. She was really disappointed in what I had done, but I was desperate, so I told her I was drunk when it happened and I wouldn't have cheated if I was sober. She seemed to understand, and she said she would help me talk to my husband, which gave me some hope. I thought maybe the pressure from my husband's mom and my parents might make him change his mind. A few weeks later, my parents decided it was time to intervene. My mother-in-law, the lawyer, said she'd message my husband and try to persuade him to forgive me. We went to my husband's house to talk things out. He hadn't been communicating with any of us and had even blocked us. But we were hoping he'd be willing to talk because he worked from home a lot. Thankfully, he was there and let us in. He offered us drinks, which seemed like a good sign, but he still didn't want to reconcile. My parents tried to talk to him about forgiveness and how what I did was wrong. He listened, but he made it clear that forgiving me wasn't something he was considering. He said even if he did forgive me, he could never forget what happened, and that it might be better for us to separate. He told me that no matter how I felt, cheating was inexcusable, and every action had consequences. He listened to what my parents had to say about forgiveness and how what I did was wrong. He listened, but he made it clear that forgiving me wasn't something he was considering. He said that even if he did forgive me, he could never forget what happened. He said that it might be better for us to separate. He told me that the best thing I could do was to sign the divorce papers to make things easier for both of us. He told me that no matter how I felt, cheating was inexcusable and that every action had consequences. I was really upset. I started crying, hoping my tears would move him, but he seemed unmoved. He was disappointed that I had involved his mom, saying it made him question his relationship with her. He also pointed out that I wasn't so drunk that I didn't know what I was doing. He thought it was foolish of me not to notice my friends recording the incident before we left. He said that signing the divorce papers would be the best thing for us both. We both needed to move on. It was a moment of clarity and a wake-up call for me. I realized I had to let William go. I had caused him immense pain and there was no way to undo the damage I had done. The only path forward was to sign those divorce papers and accept the consequences of my actions. I decided to leave with my parents, and I mustered up the courage to apologize to William. I told him that I would sign the papers and send them over. He was surprised at my sudden change in attitude, but he also seemed relieved. He thanked me, and as I walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. When I got back home, I knew I had to accept the reality of the situation. William wasn't going to take me back, and hoping for the impossible would only prolong our pain. I told my parents it was time to let him go. Dragging out the process would only waste everyone's time. William had always been a caring and loving partner, but he was also very stubborn, especially when it came to matters of principle. I knew that once he had made up his mind, there was no changing it, so I made the decision to sign the divorce papers and deliver them to him myself. I stood on his doorstep and felt a mix of emotions, regret, sadness, but also a strange sense of acceptance. I handed him I thanked him for everything and told him I was sorry. I didn't cry or plead. I knew it was over and I had to accept it. I'm waiting for the court date, knowing that my chances of a favorable outcome are slim. The video evidence of my infidelity is damning, and my brother, who is a lawyer, has told me that my case is not strong. My brother can't represent me because of a conflict of interest. He doesn't really specialize in divorce either. I'm grateful that William's terms in the divorce papers aren't too harsh. I won't be left with nothing at this point. I'll just have to accept the consequences of my actions and move forward. I've learned a hard lesson, and I'll have to live with the consequences. This will stay with me for the rest of my life. I can only hope that one day I will be able to forgive myself for the pain I have caused. So here I am, sharing my story with strangers online, hoping that maybe just maybe it can serve as a cautionary tale. Don't take your loved ones for granted. Cherish every moment you have together. Because you never know when it might be taken away from you. Hello, Reddit friends. It's been a while since I've used this platform. I love listening to other people's stories and offering advice when anyone wants it. That's why I've been so drawn to this platform. I love this I don't have any advice for anyone today. Instead, I want to share my story with all of you. It's quite strange how life turns out. I used to read people's stories here and think, does that even happen in real life? It turns out it does happen, and I'm a prime example of that. Well, anyway, here's the deal. I'm 26 years old, and my name is Molly. I'm married. My husband is the same age as me and goes by Trevor. I've known Trevor since we were in college together. We got married around 2 years ago. We were young and thought that we had found the love of our life. My husband owns a security company and the business pays pretty well. We were financially quite solid. Trevor told me that it's up to me whether I want to work or not. I told him that I can't just sit around and I need something to do. That's why I became a freelance writer. Our marriage has been pretty perfect, if I may say so myself, until I went and ruined it myself. Here's how it began. When I went to college, I met my roommate Christy. I was an introverted and shy girl, whereas Christy was the life of the party. She was always the center of attention wherever she went. She was full of energy and could win over a crowd in no time. Despite our different personalities, we hit it off instantly and became friends from the start of college. She never let me miss out on the fun and took me to most of the events with her. She played a big part in helping me become more social. I was still not an outgoing person, but it was a big step for me. I was really quite shy and introverted, but I met Trevor at a party and he really helped me to open up. I was with Christy at the time, who introduced me to Trevor and Dan, who were her classmates. I have to admit that I didn't even notice Trevor at first. My attention was totally focused on Dan. He was exactly my type, quiet, tall, and handsome. We chatted for a while and I thought we had a genuine connection. We really hit it off and talked like we'd known each other forever. That night, I was lying in bed and thinking about Dan. I was really excited because I finally found someone I had a romantic connection with. I was pretty sure he was going to ask me out soon. We had great chemistry at the party, and I was pretty sure he felt the same way. I had a lot of assignments to do. I didn't go out with Chrissy at all that week. I needed to focus on my studies, and I wanted to get the academic validation I needed. It was finally Saturday when I finished all my assignments and thought I'd meet Dan again when I got back to the dorm. Christy was already getting ready for a party near our campus. She asked me which outfit was best, and I gave her some advice. Christy told me that she was really excited because her crush was coming to the party. I couldn't stop smiling because I thought that Dan was coming to the party as well. I told her that mine was too, and we both started laughing. We didn't discuss who our crush was, thinking that we'd just introduce ourselves at the party. She helped me get ready in a really cute outfit, and we both looked great. We got ready and took a few selfies before heading to the party. Christy said she was going to find her crush and bring him so I could meet him. She left and I kept looking for Dan. I thought he would come to the party, but I couldn't find him. After half an hour, Christy came back with her crush. I was really happy. I was surprised when my friend came back with Dan. I thought we had a connection, but I was wrong. It was clear that Christy was interested in him. He kept looking at her like she was the only girl in the room. She asked me where my guy was. I couldn't tell Christy that we both had a crush on him. I wasn't going to fight with my friend over a guy, so I just shrugged and told her that he hadn't come. She pouted, but quickly let it go since Dan and I were already introduced. We didn't need that, so we all talked for a bit and then I excused myself and went to get a drink. That's when I met Trevor. I had already let go of Dan, we didn't have much of a connection. Anyway, we only met once, so it was easier to forget about him. Trevor was kind and friendly to me. We talked a lot that night and I had a few drinks, so he also offered to drop me back to my dorm. Chris had already left with Dan, so I felt like a fool for thinking that Dan was interested in me. He was just talking to me out of politeness because he was interested in my best friend. I didn't want to feel like a fool, so I decided to forget about him and move on. Trevor was quite nice when he dropped me at my dorm. I thanked him and kissed him on the cheek. He asked for my number and we started texting. We texted quite a lot and soon started dating. In addition, Christy and Dan also became quite serious with each other on a few occasions. Christy suggested that we go on a double date, but I wasn't interested. I didn't think that meeting Dan was a good idea, but Christy was quite adamant about it. We eventually went to that double date, even though I was happy with Trevor. I couldn't shake off the crush I felt for Dan. I still felt drawn to him. He asked me something I would usually be shy about. I didn't like feeling that way. Who gets a crush on their best friend's boyfriend? I started avoiding Christy and Dan. Trevor didn't seem to mind. Even though I was still friends with Christy, we weren't as close as before. Time passed by, and we all graduated college. I had forgotten about Dan and was happy in life with Trevor. We loved each other, and he kept me happy when he proposed to marry me. I said yes right away. Life was going pretty well. Our marriage was blissful until it all fell apart after college. Both Christy and Dan had gotten a good corporate job. They got married soon after us. We even attended their wedding. The crush I had on Dan felt silly. I still found him attractive. I got over the crush pretty quickly after college. Everyone got busy with their lives and we rarely saw each other. But around a year ago, everything changed. Trevor and I had a huge fight. We used to have our disagreements, but this fight was like nothing else. The fights we used to have, so what really happened was that I felt that my husband was hiding something from me. His behavior had changed. He started coming home really late and he started taking calls where I couldn't hear him. It was very different from his usual behavior. I felt it was really shady. My husband was hiding something from me. This went on for weeks, but one day I finally confronted him and asked what was going on. He acted like I was overreacting and that there were no changes in his behavior, which annoyed me even more. I told him to cut it out. I told him that he needed to be honest with me. He denied everything and told me that I was making a fuss. We kept screaming at each other. I told him that if he was cheating on me, he should tell me clearly. He got angry that I thought so little of him when I asked him to see his phone. He kept saying that he couldn't. I demanded he give it to me. I was so sure he was cheating on me that I even told him he should leave me if he had to cheat on me. We both got really mad at each other. It was the biggest fight of our relationship. I couldn't stay in the same place as him, so I went out. I just wanted a drink, so I went to this bar. I went to a bar to have a drink and get over my anger and hurt. While I was there, someone called my name. I looked up and saw Dan, the guy from college. He was surprised to see me there. He asked me what I was doing at a bar so late at night. I told him that I just needed a drink. He asked where Trevor was. I told him we'd had a fight. I was already a bit tipsy by then, so when he mentioned Trevor, I got a little emotional and had tears in my eyes. Dan noticed that and sat down by my side and started. He was trying to comfort me with random conversation and lame jokes, and I was grateful for that. I got more drunk while talking to him. We talked for a good time. I asked him what was going on with him. He told me that he had come to the bar with some client and was leaving when he saw me there. I asked him where. Christy was out of town on business for quite a few days, he told me. I listened to him talking and laughing, and it felt like my crush was coming to life again. He was just so gorgeous. I might have been a bit too drunk because I lost all my filters. We were talking about college parties. When he mentioned that we also met at one such party, I told him I remember getting a crush on him that day. He almost spilled his drink when I said that, but I realized what I said too late to take it back. It took him a moment to process everything, and then he shocked me even more when he told me that he had a crush on me. He also told me that he really liked me and was smitten with me at that party. I couldn't believe it. This guy liked me too. We could have been something. The next thing I know, I'm not in my seat anymore, and we are kissing each other. I don't remember exactly who initiated it, but we were kissing passionately like it was 1 in a million. Dan took me to his car and we ended up hooking up there. It was like there was nothing else in this world except us. I love feeling that way. I used to think about him a lot, and now I was finally with him. It seemed too good to be true. I'd forgotten everything at that moment. I didn't remember that I was married and someone's wife. After we were done, Dan asked me if I wanted to go to his house with him. I almost said yes, but then I remembered. I told him I needed to go home because my husband was waiting for me. He nodded and dropped me back at mine. I got back quite late and found Trevor asleep in the bedroom. I was grateful he was already asleep because I didn't know what I would have said to him if he was awake. I took a shower and went to sleep, hoping he wouldn't smell a man's cologne or something in the morning. I was still not really I was sober, so I just went to sleep. It wasn't until the morning when I woke up with a killer hangover that I realized what happened last night. I couldn't believe that I'd hooked up with someone else when I'm married. I felt like throwing up, especially when that someone else was my friend's husband. I was so mad at myself for doing what I did, but what was done and there was no way I could undo it all. I could only forget it and never remember it. I got up from bed and went to the kitchen to get some water as I had a terrible headache. Trevor was sitting at the table when I entered the kitchen. He asked me where I was last night. He was still angry about the fight we had the previous day. I just gave him a vague reply about needing fresh air. I didn't know if he believed my excuse or not, but he didn't push it, and I was grateful for that. I was already having a terrible headache and couldn't deal with it. Later that day, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, it was from Dan. He texted me to say that he couldn't forget what happened the night before. It wasn't signed, but it was clear that it was Dan who'd texted me. Who else would text me that, even though I couldn't forget what happened that night? I didn't even want to think about it. I didn't want to destroy my house because of temptation. I decided to cut to the chase and text Trevor to say that it was best we forget it. Dan texted me back that he couldn't pretend he'd said he wanted more time with me. I kept telling him it couldn't happen again. He started calling me after that, thankfully Trevor wasn't at home. I picked up the call with the decision to tell him firmly to forget everything. But Dan had also thought the same thing. He started telling me how life was giving us another chance to find out what we could. He said that it was magic what happened between us and that we had to explore more of it. I was tempted, but I told him that if we did this, we had to make sure that this doesn't reach anyone. I didn't want our spouses to get to know this. Dan agreed immediately and said that he doesn't want Christy or Trevor to know this either. He said that this will be just our secret. He sent me the location where we were going to meet the next day. The next day after Trevor left for work, I got dressed and left for the location Trevor had sent me. It was a good spot, right on the outskirts of the city. Noon came and went, and I was thankful for that. I parked my car next to Dan's truck and went to join him. He kissed me instantly, and soon we were making out. Making out with Dan was so fun. It was like the world used to blur out and it was just us, and that's how my affair with Dan began. He used to find random locations where there were close to zero chances that anyone would see us. We didn't get any hotel room or anything because we didn't have any evidence of us being together anywhere. Christy came back to town after her work trip. Dan said that he was being careful and that no one will ever find out. He used to pick timings for us to meet when both Trevor and Christy were busy in their offices. I thought we'd just keep going until we got this out of our system and then forget about it. But it was easier said than done. Every time I thought of stopping, Dan would say he needed a bit more time and then give me a kiss, which made me feel like I needed more time too. We gave ourselves 6 months to get this done. We decided we'd either do it in 6 months or... Even before that, Trevor and I had started being distant with each other after that fight. Part of the reason was also that I used to feel guilty in front of him, but that fight had created a big distance between us. I suspected that it was another woman, but I was involved with another man as well, so I stopped prying into what he was doing. We just maintained our distance. It was so different to what we used to be like earlier in our marriage. One day, Trevor told me that he was going out of town for work, which gave me another idea. I was tired of just meeting Dan in his truck. I needed more time with him, and somewhere other than in a vehicle. When I told him this, he didn't agree at first. He said there was a lot of risk, but after a bit of convincing, he agreed. After Trevor left in the morning, I told Dan to come over. I had switched off the security cameras placed outside our home. It was all clear, so Dan came over soon after. Christy I left for work and took Dan to the guest room. I was really happy to have him there. We got together and Dan left shortly after Trevor left. He'd been gone for 2 days, so the next morning I asked Dan to come over again. He was a bit reluctant to get caught, but he agreed. He came over and we went to the guest room. I was so lost at that moment that I didn't notice when the front door opened. Dan was on top of me when the door to the guest room opened, and Trevor, as soon as the door opened, we froze. Trevor wasn't supposed to come back home until the next day, so I was pretty shocked to see him there. He seemed just as shocked, or maybe even more so, before I could say anything to him. He just slammed the door and went out. Dan quickly rolled off me, and I got dressed and went after Trevor. He wasn't in the living room, so I went outside to look for him, but his car was also not there. Dan came out as well. We both had ruined our home. We didn't say anything to each other, and then he just left. I think he went to Christy to make sure Trevor doesn't reach her before him. I kept calling Trevor because I was scared that he wouldn't think before he acted. He's always had a temper and I didn't want him to do something irrational. He never picked up my call. Dan called me later to tell me that Trevor had called Christy and now she was furious at him. He said that we cannot talk again, and I just hung up on him. I was waiting for Trevor to come back, but he didn't. The whole day passed like that. I even called his friends and his office, but no one knew where he was. I fell asleep on the couch while I was waiting. It was around midnight that Trevor finally got back. I was really angry when I tried to go near him. He just pushed me away. I tried to say something, but he told me to keep my mouth shut. He said he had seen enough and that there was nothing I could say to make it okay. To be honest, I understood his anger. It was justified, but I still didn't want it to end our marriage. I know it was selfish of me, but I just couldn't watch my house get destroyed. I kept telling Trevor it was just a temptation and meant nothing else. I tried to reason with him that it was just physical and there were no emotions involved. It was the wrong thing to say, though. When I said it, he got even more upset. He threw away the vase and kept on the table and told me to get out of his house by the next morning. I told him that he cannot kick me out of the house. We had built the house together and I had designed everything by myself. We had so many memories here, but he just laughed and he said that if I didn't, I'd have to face the consequences in a much worse way. He stormed off to the bedroom, and I sat in the living room with my head in my hands, finally realizing that I'd ruined my life. I'd ruined my beautiful marriage just because of a meaningless affair. I thought I deserved one more chance. I mean, one small mistake can't end all those years I spent with Trevor. I figured his anger might cool down a bit overnight, and then I could try to convince him in the morning to give me one more chance. I decided I'd give it my all if Trevor decided to give me one. I decided to stay at home instead of leaving like he'd asked. I thought I'd try talking to him the next morning when he woke up. When he found me downstairs, he was really angry. He asked what I was doing there in a harsh tone. I told him we needed to talk, but he just said that I should have talked to him before going to bed with another man. I told him to listen to me just one time, but he wasn't interested. He was just screaming how I'd betrayed him, and that too with his friend. He even abused Dan and said how we both were disgusting as human beings. He asked me how I didn't know how to respond to his question, so I just stood there with my head down. He looked at me with so much hatred in his eyes and told me how he came home earlier because he wanted to spend some quality time with me, but he never knew that I was such a horrible person. He told me to leave his place as soon as possible and to never show him my face again. He told me to leave as soon as possible and never show my face to him again. He even brought my suitcase and asked me to get out of there. I was really embarrassed and ashamed. I felt humiliated and decided it was best if I left. I thought that maybe staying apart for a while would give him some perspective. I thought that if I gave him some space, he'd forgive me. I left the house and went to stay at my sister's place in the same town. She was really mad at me for cheating on my husband, but because she was my only sibling, she had to come to my rescue. I decided that I'd stay at her place for a few days and then maybe I'd go back, and I thought I'd either move in with Trevor or find somewhere else to live. I kept texting him, hoping for a reply, but I didn't hear anything back. He used to see my texts but never respond. A few days passed like this, and I was already a mess. I missed Trevor. My mind kept going back to the time when we were together. It felt like a lifetime ago. I was genuinely regretting what I had done. I thought I was in the lowest phase of my life. I had lost my husband at home. I didn't think anything could be worse, but I was wrong. It had been 2 weeks since I went to a coffee shop to get a coffee. I was sitting in the coffee shop when a strange man came and sat in front of me. I was quite taken aback when he called me by my name and said hello. He gave me a smile which really creeped me out. I asked him how he knew me, but he didn't reply to my question. He told me that he is from a bank. I'd never heard of that bank. He said they'd been trying to contact me for a week, but I'd never replied. I didn't know why they wanted to get in touch. I didn't have a bank account in their name. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. He brought out an envelope and told me that he said they went to my address, but they were told I don't live there anymore. I was still confused as to what this guy was talking about. I opened the envelope and found a credit card bill in my name. It listed so many expenses that I got a whiplash. The total amount was $50. I told him it was a mistake and they must be looking for someone else because it definitely wasn't me. I also told him I didn't have a bank account with that bank. He looked at me like I was joking and said he was sure I had an account with them. He showed me my bank details and there was an account in my name with all my IDs. He said he'd bring it with him, and we were still at home with Trevor. The bank guy went on, saying that they would have emailed me or texted me, but the email address was no longer in use and the phone number given wasn't in service either. I was completely baffled by everything that was happening. How could I possibly owe $50,000? I told him I'd get back to him. He said I had a month to pay the full amount. He just wanted to deliver the bill in person. I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Trevor. I called a cab and went to the house. Trevor wasn't there, and the main gate was locked. I had to find him. I went to his office, but he wasn't there. I asked around, but no one really knew where he was. I kept calling Trevor, but he didn't pick up. It was almost evening, so I went back to my sister's place. I took out my laptop and researched more about the bank. It turns out you can easily open an account with basic documents. I looked through their policies and saw that they were very strict about debt, just like most banks. They didn't even have an installment system, so I had to deposit the entire amount in just 1 month. Trevor had to explain this to me. I kept calling and leaving messages, but I got nothing but silence. I went to the house the next day, before Trevor left for work. I didn't have the full amount with me. How was I supposed to pay it? I did it the next morning. I left for home, and Trevor was still there. I asked him what was going on. He asked me why I came back. I told him to first tell me why there was a debt of $50. There was a $500 debt on my account, from a bank I'd never heard of. When he heard this, he finally smiled like he'd gotten something he wanted. He said that it took them quite a long time to figure out my location. I looked at him with confusion. He just shrugged and started telling me that I should be more careful. Identity theft is getting quite serious. I told him not to waste my time with that. I keep all my IDs and documents here. How could someone use them to open a bank account in my name? He just smiled and said that maybe I gave it to them. I was shocked to hear this. My husband had given my identity to criminals. I asked him why he would do that and why did he even know people like that. He said that I was forgetting that he owns a security company, which meant that he knew all kinds of people. I was doubting him and thinking that he was having a fit because he was always on his phone or in his office. It was because he was tracking these groups of cyber criminals who were stealing people's IDs and committing financial frauds with them. He was committing financial frauds with them. I was still processing everything when Trevor continued telling me that when he saw me with Dan, he knew he wanted to see me suffer. That's when he contacted them and gave them all my IDs. I asked him what he would get out of this. Why was he being like this? He got angry as he remembered something and then he said I'd betrayed him and broken his trust. He said I deserved it for hurting him like that. He kept telling me how he wanted to build a complete life of luxuries for me, but I'd given up everything for just a meaningless affair. The anger and hurt in his voice were so evident that I couldn't stop crying. He told me that I should not waste my crocodile tears. It had no effect on him. He told me to leave and never contact him again. I was just leaving the house when he told me to keep checking my bank account statements. I thought that was a very specific and weird thing to say. As soon as I left, I opened my phone and checked the balance of my personal account. I checked my bank account and saw that all the money from my freelancing work had been credited to my personal account. I don't usually check my bank balance, but I knew there should be a decent amount in there. I was really shocked to see that my account was in the negative. I checked the transactions and saw that someone had withdrawn all the money using my credentials. Someone had used my credentials to withdraw all the money from my account. I was so upset that I started crying right there. I didn't think anything could make me feel worse than when Trevor threw me out of the house, but this was something I couldn't have imagined in a few days. I had lost my husband, become homeless, and now I was broke with a debt of $50. I was in tears. I had no idea what I was going to do. I managed to pull myself together and went back to my sister's place. She was concerned when she saw me looking upset. I told her everything. She suggested we file a complaint, but I told her it wouldn't help. These cybercriminals are very clever. They've covered their tracks well, and there's nothing we can do now. She comforted me and said we'd figure something out. I just kept crying in her arms. A few days passed like this. That day when Trevor caught us, I hadn't heard from Dan or Christy in a while. I wouldn't have called him, but I was in need of assistance and thought that maybe I could get a loan from him. When I called him, he picked up, but his tone was completely different from what it used to be with me. He asked me quite harshly why I had called him. I was quite taken aback by his tone, but I told him that I needed his help. He said that he couldn't do anything. He had finally agreed to give him another chance. She had forgiven him, but if she found out, she said that if she found out, she'd be furious. She advised me not to call him again, or he'd block me. The guy who convinced me to have an affair was telling me that he was going to block my number. I was at rock bottom. No one was going to help me. I decided to get any work I could to take the pressure off. Everything was already a struggle. Trevor also sent me divorce papers. His lawyer said I could contact my lawyer, but I didn't have the money to afford a lawyer and then seek alimony. I didn't have the energy for that, so I just signed wherever they asked. They said that they'll contact me as and when required, so that's it. That's the summary of everything that had happened in the past few days. I went from a sweet and perfect wedding life to homeless and broke. Karma is really real. It got me back from my affair with Dan. I'm really hurt by what Trevor did to me, but I couldn't fault him when he loved me. He loved me with everything, so how could I expect him to take his revenge? He wasn't the type of guy to do things half-heartedly. Currently, I'm working non-stop at writing for small companies, which is nearly not enough for what I need right now, but it's still better than nothing. I'm still crashing at my sister's place. It was a good thing that she lived alone, otherwise I didn't know what I was going to do. Currently, I have no idea what is going to happen, so I'm just figuring out one day at a time. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them here.